Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are in the world. This is the 10th discussion session in our series on small-scale PPPs. This series is sponsored or is put together by the World Association of PPP Units, WAP, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE. We are very proud to be partnering with UNECE for this very important project. And hopefully at the end of this process, we will be publishing a joint document of guidelines for small-scale PPPs. So these discussion sessions are meant to be interactive for everybody to contribute their ideas and thoughts on this subject so that we all learn from each other. The idea is to harness all the thoughts, all the ideas that will help us achieve small-scale PPPs, as difficult as they are, as difficult to finance, difficult to justify, difficult to get done at the local level. You know, there are so many hurdles facing them, and this is why our collective input is really important. We started this series by defining what are small-scale PPPs, and then we moved on to address some of the possible initial thoughts, or actually then we studied what are the hurdles facing small-scale PPPs, and then we talked about what are some of the initial solutions that people can think about. We looked at some of the legal ramifications, and then we had 3 sessions that covered case studies from different parts of the world, really literally from all continents. And the last session, session 9, was about technology and how technology can be used to help achieve small-scale PPPs, especially by way of reducing the cost of preparation of projects. So today we are talking about financing small-scale PPPs. What are some of the ideas that people have? What have they tried? What do they think might be interesting to try out in terms of financing? Effective financing is crucial for the longevity and impact of small-scale PPPs. In today's session, we will explore various innovative financing approaches designed to address the unique challenges these opportunities face, from improving access to capital and leveraging public and private funding sources to structuring financial models that ensure sustainability and risk mitigation. We aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of the financial strategies that can support and enhance small-scale PPPs. Joining us today, well, first by way of introduction, my name is Ziad Alexander Hayek. I'm the president of WAP. Many of you perhaps have heard me introduce the previous sessions. I'm just delighted to be here with a fantastic panel that has really experts in this field. I will introduce them perhaps one by one. Doris Chevalier is an independent board member of Aéroport de Paris International, the independent observer representing private sector at the Bureau for the PPPs at the UNECE in Geneva, and an independent member of the EDRAM Investment Committee. He has over 30 years of experience in financing infrastructure and renewable energy projects. He's an expert in the field of infrastructure financing, in particular rail PPPs. Those are big, but trust me, Doris has a lot of experience in small projects as well. She has, to her credit, an experience of more than 70 projects worldwide, representing more than 20 billion euros in financing. We also have with us Johnson Kilangi. Johnson is a project finance and PPP consultant with 16 years of cumulative experience in the infrastructure financing sector in East Africa. He's also a steering committee member and chair of the finance chapter of WAP. Johnson is a director of the Taita Taveta County Investment and Development Corporation, working very much so on the local government level. It's the investment arm of the county government of Taita Taveta in Kenya. He advises the county on infrastructure investments. He's also the founder and chief executive officer of Nyundu Misingi, which is involved in training in PPP. Joining us also is Prakash Prakash Seshadri Nathan. He is the CEO and Executive Director of Qatari Water Management, which is the water platform of India's largest climate fund. Prakash has been at the forefront of PPP transactions in India and Southeast Asia for around 25 years. His sectoral expertise has been in the renewable energy and the water, waste, and wastewater sectors. Prakash is an alumnus of the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore and an IMPM certificate holder from INSEAD. Last but not least is Dr. Raghu Dharmapuri Tirumala. He's a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning of the University of Melbourne. Thank you, Raghu, for staying up so late to be with us. Raghu holds a PhD in built environment, that's PPPs in urban drinking water, and has extensive experience in infrastructure financing and public-private partnerships. Formerly, he served as the CEO of IDEC, wherein he assisted in the development of many PPP projects of different scales. So today we have, it's a roundtable. I'm going to ask some questions, and please, panelists, feel free to contribute your thoughts. I will direct my question to one panelist just to start the conversation, but feel free to interrupt and budge in at any time. It's meant to be a free-flowing conversation. So let's start with some of the innovative financing mechanisms that you can think about. Basically, what are some innovative financing mechanisms that are currently being used for small-scale PPPs? What about crowdfunding? There any local investment initiatives that you know of that have been structured in this way? And I will leave it at that for now and give the floor to Doris, maybe, to start us off. We can't hear you, Doris.
Okay, here I am. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, I'm really happy to be there and happy to share my my knowledge in PPP, and namely small-scale PPP. Well, coming to innovation, finance innovation, I would say that small-scale PPP is a constant finance innovation. I mean, there are some specificities to small-scale PPPs, and namely the fact that we are talking about a project of less than 50 million, which generally means that equity is around 10 million euros. So you're not looking at the same partners as usual as for the big projects. And they are investors who are specialized in these financing ranges, but often they are not experts in PPP. They are of the investor for these kind of ranges of amount, but they do not know much about PPP. And we found them quite often in private equity or private debt. And therefore, in these small projects, the bulk of the work consists in synthesizing as much as possible the theoretical requirements of the PPP and translating that into the codes of private financing. And also because you're switching to private market, private debt market, private equity, venture capital. I mean, this is a market which is changing quite a lot. So you've got to innovate constantly to finance the project. Therefore, in my view, I mean, that's financial engineering, which is the bulk of the success of the financing of the project, and the ability of the experts to find the perfect formula for each expert. So we do not have much standardized formula for financing PPP, except maybe in very mature sector, just like solar or things like that. But for other projects, I mean, it's quote unquote haute couture, I would say, project financing. If we come to crowdfunding, and I would like to open the discussion about crowdfunding, we often use it for seed financing for small amounts, from 200,000 euros to 1 million, and quite often for upstream phases of the project. That's what we call pre-seed or seed financing, but very rarely afterward, because the crowdfunding documentation is complicated to organize within the financial documentation of the PPP. where everything is pledged to the benefit of the lenders. And so what do you give back to grant funders? That's not an easy one. And compared to the side of the project, you do not want to go to some complex documentation. Yes, sometimes with crowdfunding, we can have nice surprises in very marked sectors where you find aficionados. I had some in culture, namely, where you can rise up to 4, 5, 6 million. And last point, which was quite interesting in crowdfunding, it was very fashionable some 5 years ago, but and we see the emergence of platforms for crowdfunding, but some of them have not been very selective in terms of due diligence. Project went wrong, and then the donors became quite risk adverse, and the trust went a little bit away. So this is basically my feeling for crowdfunding and innovation, and maybe my colleagues here on the call have got different views.
Let's see.
May I jump
Somebody
in?
wants to jump in?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Prakash.
I think the fundamental issue, whether it is large or small PPPs, is really about bringing the stakeholders on the table. So, and one of the characteristics of small-scale PPPs is also about how are we going to prepare projects for the private market. And there again, the similarities is the same. I mean, if you don't prepare these small-scale projects in the right way, what it will often do is set a bad example and then shoo away the private investors. So I think the most important and basic thing in small-scale PPPs is how do we get the funding required for project preparation so that we can showcase as the government or the municipality or the local government the kind of projects that would necessarily attract private investment. So I would like to talk about an experiment that we did about more than 20 years ago in one of the provincial Indian states, where there was a project development company which was set up essentially to manage a project development fund. So it was fairly simple. The project development company had two objectives. One is to manage the project development fund in order to develop projects and bring it to the market. These were even very small projects, $5 million, $10 million projects, but also create the right atmosphere both within the municipal government as well as the private market, that we are not doing this one-off. We have an institutional structure to essentially bring about a whole series of projects which are well structured. And you mentioned the point about reluctance of government in one of our earlier private conversations to undertake these kind of procedures with respect to, are they willing and open to go to the private market and bring in private investments? All this tricky stuff, this project development company will do with the seed capital. And this is really like venture funding. And this venture funding typically is done by the government. And then maybe an institution like the World Bank, or if there are large financial institutions in the particular country, they can also chip in with the venture funding. And we all know that if you develop 10 projects, maybe 2 or 3 of them will become successful, which is the same case with venture funding. So if a project becomes successful, the venture fund recovers the capital. It essentially puts it back into the venture fund and then keeps going. The project development company has a natural incentive because they get a bonus when a project is successfully developed and delivered. So I think the whole emphasis when we want to bring in more and more small-scale PPPs is what is the innovative financing structure first required in project development so that we create a whole host of pipeline.
Right. Thank you, Prakash. Actually, this is a topic that we will come back to later on in this conversation. That's the topic of funds. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on this initial idea of what may have been tried or you think would be good, or crowdfunding or otherwise?
Maybe I can jump
Johnson?
in, Ziad. Yeah, thank you
Go
so
ahead.
much, Ziad, for inviting me to this session, which cuts at the core of our chapter, the finance chapter. I often try to avoid, the big word innovative, because I think it's relative, and we need to look at different regions of the world that are in different stages of building their PPP programs. So if you look at emerging markets, for example, the African continent, which is still at its nascent stage of developing PPP projects, I think for me, an innovative financing solution for PPP projects is one that is able to navigate all these challenges and allow this project to deliver the intended objectives of that project. You find markets that have quite some limitations in terms of raising financing, in terms of capacity, in terms of knowledge of the techniques as to how to deliver infrastructure projects through the PPP model. So I think the innovation comes in if it's able to navigate all these challenges, bring all these stakeholders together, and still deliver the intended objectives of that particular project. I think that is where I see innovation. An architecture that is able to attract more financing, especially from the local financial market, an architecture or mechanism that is able to attract local participants to be involved in these projects, a mechanism that is able to optimize the benefits to the users of that particular project, while allowing the government to deliver on its mandate through the private sector. So that is how I look at it in terms of the market we are coming from.
Yeah, and that, I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because these small projects have a bigger impact on local communities. So you have higher reactions from the communities, and therefore the politicals are more concerned by this little project, because it may go fast and furious, much quicker than a big project. And also there's the fact that small project, so you got small actors, small company, and when structuring the financing of the project, you're switching to a usual security package based on balance sheets of big companies to having a robust project. And Prakash mentioned it. I mean, the preparation of the project in a small scale PPP is really key. I mean, it allows you less fluctuation. I mean, you've got to be very rigorous and really prepare well the project.
Actually, I mean, we, in the first session of this series, we defined small-scale PPPs not by amount, but rather by a ratio. So it's a small-scale PPP is basically a project where the cost of preparation is going to exceed a certain norm, let's say 3 or 4% of the cost of capex of investing in the project. This is, when you're exceeding that ratio, it sort of makes it very difficult to justify doing the PPP project, and therefore, you end up considering it as a small-scale PPP, which works out to anything from $50 million, as you said, Doris, down to, could be a $50,000 project for a parking in a small town. And really, it is at that micro level that the SDGs that we think could start being realized. It is by harnessing local financing. And question is how to attract local financing. I mentioned crowdfunding, not perhaps in the technological sense of setting up a platform online, but in my experience, at least in my country, in Lebanon, we've had a couple of projects where, because the government is not providing electricity, people have come together and and decided to set up a solar farm. And it is the inhabitants of the village that actually raised a little bit of money from here, from there. Obviously, according to shares, some people have a little bit more share than others, and then they set up their farm, their solar farm. I don't know if you've seen other similar situations elsewhere. I don't know. Maybe I want to give the floor to Raghu. Maybe you have
Thank you,
this,
Syed.
or other subject, just a general. Go ahead.
No, all of us are working in this area, so all of us have some opinions about how do we look at financing in this area. But it's first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this panel. The way you asked the first question, looking at innovation, and the first reaction from Doris kind of captures everything in what we are trying to say. Small scale PPPs, as you have put in, that's more the general definition what we follow in terms of the size of project development vis-a-vis the overall capex that's there. But every project, as Doris has put it, is kind of innovation for the in terms of the structuring, in terms of what financing we do. I remember multiple projects over a period of time, how these things happened. Interestingly, there are two sides to the coin. Who prepares the project and who actually finances the project. The government or the agency who is actually putting a project together, the way they look at the financing, most of the time is completely different from what actually happens once the project is bid out and then the private sector is actually doing the project. How are they getting the money and how did government think that the project will get financed? So to Doris' point of innovation, right from the days of using a simple debt to equity, what governments think is the innovation to start that. Then we introduce something called a grant, we introduce something called a multilateral funding. We use the word called blended finance as we kept moving along, started looking at viability gap, trying to fix some rates. So the innovation, of course, depends upon the project structuring, depends upon what you are looking at. For a simpler project, when I call simple, just for the sake of argument, Government of India at one point of time defined a metro rail project to be simple, not small, simple. It's not complex. That's how they have defined it. But anyway, the challenge is what we think the innovation which happens at the government level is not necessarily what actually happens on the private sector. And there are various instances, things change completely. Now, crowdfunding, as you said, the only example which I can think of in the Indian context, not necessarily a PPP, but essentially when the tourism sector in Kerala, one of the smaller states in the southern India, which became the showpiece for India in terms of tourism properties which are coming in. It was crowdfunded by the non-resident Keralites, who are outside the country. They gave the money to India and then they were able to develop the tourism potential substantially. No, not necessarily in the conventional sense of PPPs as we understand, but that's one area which has been under crowdfunding. Unfortunately, in India, there's a regulation which kind of bars the money as a crowdfunding we can do. India has some kind of a corporate social responsibility equivalent, which money comes in but doesn't necessarily flow into PPPs in that angle. I'll stop here, but we can continue the discussion on this topic as we keep going along.
Thank you.
I can see Doris and Prakash raise their hands.
Yes, indeed. It's interesting that you mentioned the role of diaspora and expatriates in financing some of the projects, small-scale PPP, because really, having been an immigrant myself and lived among immigrants for many, many years, I know that people love their country, but they love their hometown even more. And so, I imagine municipalities starting websites where they say, this is the project that we have. They can, then probably attract people from their expatriate community to come. And so the Kerala example is very interesting. Would love to learn more about it. Doris, you wanted to go next.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to add something about what Raghu said is about timing. The difference between a big PPP and a small-scale PPP is timing. And because you've got this high impact on local politicians, because it touches directly the community, the time is not the same to develop a small PPP and a big PPP. And this affects financing. When you're structuring a PPP, a normal one, I would say, I mean, it takes about 9 to 18 months to structure the financing. And you got the time to do the full due diligence and so on. But when it comes to a small scale PPP, you do not have that time. So you've got 3 to 6 months because you're talking to local companies. They do not have cash to wait for 9 to 6 months. It's shorter amount, it's shorter timing, and you've got to accelerate the process. This is why it's really key, as Raghu said, to make the documentation as simple as possible, so that you go fast, so that everyone understands what you are doing, and so that they are you limit as maximum the negative comments you could have on the project.
Yes, in previous sessions, we talked about the importance of PPP units developing programs rather than projects. And, developing program with standard documentation, which would also involve not only putting out standard documentation, but educating local government officials on the use of general aspects of PPP and the use of that documentation. Prakash.
Yeah, I just want to pick on where Raghu said about community. One of the earliest projects in the South Indian state of Kerala, which was developed as, you can call it crowdfunding. It is not about project development, it's actually project financing. A greenfield airport came up at a cost, at today's USD cost of about $25 million, a greenfield airport, as a joint venture between non-resident Keralites, the government of Kerala, which is a province, and a local bank. And they essentially teamed up to acquire the land, build the runway, and build a small terminal. And I remember going to the chief executive officer of this company, essentially to say that at that time I was working with a large infrastructure developer. We said, we can give you a lot of money, but structure the project this way so that the private sector interests are protected. And he gave me a great word of wisdom. He said, this is a project where a lot of land acquisition is required. And I have tried to finance it in the most quick and uncomplicated way. And my objective is to make sure that I have a runway, I have the aeronautical system so that planes can land. I don't care whether the passengers have to wait in the rain when they are boarding the flight. But once the flights start to land, then I will come back to you for expansion. So I think that's a great lesson on how innovative financing and a committed local bureaucrat and a government can put projects on the line. We don't get any pleasure by seeing great documentation. We see great pleasure by actually having a project on the ground, right?
Amazing.
Really the way to go.
Amazing. This is wonderful. I love hearing that. That is a lot to learn from this thing. A lot to learn. Rao, do you want to comment on this specific thing, or should I give the floor to Johnson, who wanted to talk?
Johnson raised his hand first, I think.
Okay,
let him
go ahead,
comment
Johnson.
on that.
Yeah, thank you, Raghu. So I think for me, Ziad, I just wanted to add, I think innovations come if we are able to bring on board different mechanisms of financing these projects beyond, crowdfundings. And I want to give an example of how we can deploy more than these solutions to raise financing for these projects. I think the first important thing we must agree is that we must have a good project in place that is able to attract financing. And all these projects we're talking about are basically solutions to meet the needs of the people. So there has to be an alignment between the technical solution that you're putting together and the needs of the people. When that is in place, then we need to look at the government. What is the government's role in building an ecosystem that allows these investors to be protected? So when that ecosystem is developed and there's an alignment and the project can effectively meet the needs of the people, then we start thinking, which options do we have to raise this financing? So crowdfunding is definitely one of the good examples. In fact, we are currently considering it in our county. As Ziad has said, we tend to love the towns we come from. So if we're able to put together a good water project that is able to alleviate water challenges in a town, then chances are very high that if this project is able to meet that need, then we are able to attract the diaspora community to finance that project. But that can only happen if there has been a framework that is already developed to protect this investment in this project. We are looking at sustainable finance. How can we structure this project to make sure that it's able to attract sustainable finance? Again, how can we make sure that it ticks those boxes that providers of sustainable finance are looking at? We're also looking at how can we have the same government chipping in some funds into the same project, because ultimately it's going to improve the lives of the people of that area. The government is going to save on investment that it puts perhaps on healthcare, because we have clean water in the community. So what I'm saying is, how can we put this or structure this project in such a way that it can attract all these different mechanisms of financing this project? And I think that is what we need to do for these small scale projects, because ultimately they reduce the quantum that the private party that will lead that project has to raise in terms of financing, making it attractive and ultimately making it easier for that project to meet the need of the people. So all these models, I think we need to see how do we bring them on board in these projects.
Thank you. You touched on two things which we'll come back to. One is having a framework, and the other one is basically de-risking the project and how we can do that. But Rao, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to come back to the original question, what you started off with, Syed. I mean, innovative finance definitely happens in a small PPP. Maybe crowdfunding is not a kind of a mainstream source of financing for most smaller PPPs, at least in the region which I have worked there. Probably by nature, if we really have to use the crowdfunding, like example of Cochin, what Prakash had given, or example of Kerala, what I was speaking of, or I mean, it happened in the sanitation field and municipal solid waste here and there. There are examples, and again, South India, similar state, where you have women cooperatives coming together, funding a little bit on their own, but supported substantially by the government in the funding of the municipal solid waste equipment, etc. So these things do happen, but more than the crowdfunding as a particular instrument, the question of innovativeness in terms of the municipal or a small scale PPPs across various government levels is a really critical thing. The challenge there, of course, is the government simply don't know what to do. Then will there be a substantial support on the project development, which when the projects do come up are very, very simple, very, very small. For instance, as we speak, one city in South India, Bangalore, is trying to now create a circular rickshaw system. It's like a vehicular system to feed into the metro, which they're not thought through when they initially put up their metro system at that point of time. Now they're trying to do it. The window for bidding is less than 30 days. In a 30-day time frame, you try and get money and then try and raise something and then do a pilot, procure the e-vehicles, etc. Is going to be a challenge. It's just very small PPP, one particular route. And the preparation is hardly anything, is their thinking. So the challenge and innovation is there, not necessarily on crowdfunding, but how do you look at financing mechanisms and what will work, what won't work? And that's the challenge which we need to kind of get through to get these projects on the ground.
Yeah, there's also the challenge of transparency that becomes even more acute in small-scale PPPs, as this example in Bangalore that you're mentioning. People are inevitably going to say, well, it was pre-cooked for a particular bidder. And that's very unfortunate. That's why UNECE has developed zero tolerance to corruption documentation, which invite all people watching this or listening to us to consult many fantastic publications that UNECE has put out. Yes, Raghu, you want to say something?
Sorry, I'm just saying well, of course, that is the first reaction we kind of end up when some project we're trying to squeeze the time in terms of bidding. The governments always are in a rush, unfortunately. They are always in a rush, but not not quick enough to react to something. So that also is a kind of a feeling. I'm not saying any malintention is there in this particular project, but just that by nature they are tuned to looking at very short bidding periods.
No. I mean, we're not suggesting any malfeasance or bad intentions. As you well say, governments are always in a rush, and the Prime Minister wants the airport built the day before yesterday. But that is what eventually, even in the best intended environments, leads to failure in PPPs. And again, I mean, nothing specific to this project, just using that as piece of conversation to structure our thoughts around. Well, I mean, I could go on to talking about some other things. We have talked about financing in terms of equity, mainly thinking of equity, but debt plays an important role in PPPs, and small-scale PPPs the same. So any thoughts on where debt could be obtained and how to, and before we get into let's say credit enhancements and de-risking and all of that, but just as sources of funds and what can be done about them. I'll let Doris go first, ladies first, since you raised your hands at the same time.
Thank you very much. That's a privilege of being a female. And well, I mean, basically, yeah, I mean, private debt is really key in small scale PPP. I mean, mostly all the financing that we have in small scale PPP in Europe is through private debt and or national saving banks. I mean, this is maybe one, we'll come back on that point, because not all countries have a national saving bank, and national saving bank, you got to use it locally speaking. So that's another full subject itself. But coming to private debt, there is there's a large panel of private debtors, and so you're switching to venture capital and private equity capital, but I mean, you will find in there many actors that really wants to be part of the resuming of the economy or the development of the countries. I mean, you mentioned the diaspora, but there is not only the diaspora, there is also the religious diaspora, and doing a lot, and you've got religions gathering up all together in funds or in associations to develop the financing of a project, and they are very flexible, I would say. I mean, they have the obligation of a certain level of remuneration, so you still need to discuss the remuneration. But what I've experienced is that they are very flexible in terms of structure of repayment, and you can really structure the deals. And quite often those small scales PPP, they need sculpted debt to be adapted to the profile of the cash flows. And these actors are open to that. They are not standardized, and they are quite open in the discussion of the structuring of the debt. And that's really really a good way to go forward for the financing of the projects.
Yeah, indeed, Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Ziad. I think I've spoken a number of times emphasizing the importance of countries that are starting up with their PPP programs to start with small projects, so small-scale PPPs. I think small-scale PPPs is the most efficient way for these countries to tap from their local financing market. There is no way we can build sustainable infrastructure PPP projects if we continue leveraging on foreign capital. So debt that is supposed to be injected in these small-scale PPP projects should come from the local financial market. So there is need for us to incentivize the local banks to participate or to come up with specialized financing packages that can suit these small-scale PPPs. I think that's the only way that we can start learning. We can start having smaller, our local banks being involved in these projects at the initial phases, of course, with a sight of bigger projects as we build capacity. And even as we try and deploy bigger projects, the local banks can still come up with syndicated facilities with foreign banks or with bigger banks to provide debt for this project. So my recommendation would be that debt for this project should come from the local market, and we need to create that ecosystem that allows or incentivizes these local banks to participate in these projects.
Very interesting indeed. I mean, that's also being able to mitigate foreign exchange risk for those small projects is very important, and getting financing local currency becomes super important. Rao?
Yeah, in the context of India, at least,
Rao,
whatever
can you
I've
hear
seen.
me? Are you? Maybe
Can you hear
lost
me now?
Rao.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So
I
in
can
the
hear you,
context of
yes. Go ahead. Yes.
in the context of India, at least, when we look from a government perspective and trying to structure a project, a small PPP, most of the time we were looking at a pure project finance equivalent in terms of the government, and then hoping that the institutions who specialize in project finance lend to it. But surprisingly, most of the bidders who actually won the projects, be it a, let's say, a commercial complex or a car parking or even a solid waste management, everyone ended up putting most of the money through equity, and whatever they had to, I mean, let's say we assumed a 70-30 debt equity ratio and tried to say that, okay, we will get some bank to fund 70% of the project through a project finance model. It so happened that it might be 50-50 equivalent, 50% equity, 50% debt, and debt is coming from a regular corporate finance banking, the substantial collateral being asked. And that's what has happened across car parks to commercial parks to solid waste management, different projects. So the funding, and the banks, which are the conventionally who are there in the corporate finance, they became quite big for the small scale PPPs. And as things moved on, they started looking at syndication, but very rare. Normally, because the size of the project itself is, it so happens will be very small. So 1 or 2 banks at the most will get involved. But largely in a corporate finance on the strength of the balance sheet of the developer. That's what has happened. The bond market is essentially negligent in India for looking at PPPs and small scale PPPs in that particular sense. So it so happens equity, which is big. Where are they getting equity? No, it's not raising from the market. It's either the families and friends and the other businesses which have actually participated here. I don't think, I mean, I may be wrong, Prakash or someone might be able to correct me, but I think the situation is still the same. The local banks and the own equity is what is prevailing for the small PPPs at this stage. I don't know, Prakash.
Allow me, Prakash, sorry, to follow up on this question before giving you the floor. Maybe you can also help answer it. India is one of the few countries around the world that has an active local capital market. Brazil being another one, and maybe South Africa. Just very few countries have that luxury. But still, the Indian experience is very telling and very important. So what would you say off the top of your head? I know there are no good figures, but just as a subjective estimate, what would be the debt to equity ratio in a small scale PPP project in India? That's number one. And number two, do either the national government or state governments have any development funds that they're making available for PPP projects? Brazil, for example, has the National Development Bank, which is huge and very active. And actually, they've participated in several of our sessions where they've given us amazing examples of what they're able to do. I was wondering if that's the case in India as well. Maybe I'll let Prakash answer this first and then give you the floor, Rahul.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to answer that question, see, we have to look at debt equity and the source of debt capital. First of all, based on the project itself. Okay. So if there is a clear use case for a project where you are able to capture some revenues from the benefits, then there is a good possibility of increasing debt. I'm not saying anything new. I mean, this is simple arithmetic, right? Now, there are projects which, for example, in India, there is a very large program for cleaning up our holy river, Ganges. And there, what has happened is government has set aside 40% of the capital of the project as government funding, as grant money. So that is zero cost. So then you are left with raising 60%. And then you look at how do you raise that 60%? Out of the 60 as an absolute percentage, you could possibly get 40 to 45% from the Indian commercial banks, and 10 to 15% will become equity from the developer. So if you look at it from an overall debt to equity ratio, you are actually saying 40% of the project is coming from the local market. And India, that way, is very fortunate that we have a well-developed local commercial banking system, right? Now, you look at the other way, has there been instances when local municipalities, based on the strength of their finances, because the local municipality is actually serving a community of people, they are providing all sorts of services. Have they been serving the community in such a manner and charging for their services in such a manner that they have a very good balance sheet? Okay. Now, if you look at those municipalities in India, they have the power to raise money from public as debt. So people have come out with bond issuances where you can use that bond issuance for a very specific project as grant from the government, because the government has other sources of income to repay this loan, even if the specified project does not yield enough revenue. So in that particular case, and if you and the project by itself, let us say, again, using some numbers, let us say the total project cost is 100 units. 40 or 50% of the money comes in from this bond market. And the rest of the money, 60%, is to be brought in by the private developer. And he goes to another bank for leveraging. And he gets 40% from the debt market. In those instances, which are rare, of course, you technically have financed 80% of the project from debt, right? So, so these are, let us say, two extremes, and the number of projects which are other than renewable energy and some of the projects where government is able to give guarantee for offtake, there the standard debt equity would be 60-40, 70-30, but these are not small. These are actually programs. These are not single projects, right? So I think we are kind of fortunate. I don't think the Indian example can be kind of transported to, let's say, Africa and then other countries, because each country will have its own specificity with respect to how much money you can raise from the local market.
Right. No, but still very, very important yardstick. Raghu, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking on the project development fund aspect, what you suggested. India has been fortunate at a government of India level, at a national level. You have a big project fund, which they made available for PPPs, irrespective of the size of the project, small or big. So what has happened after that subsequently, even now, if you go to the Government of India website, they have a list of 1,820 or 1,830 projects listed as PPPs on there, and majority of them are small.
1,800 projects.
1830, around that range.
Amazing.
I published one paper on that. So, but
okay.
Let's not look at the veracity of each project there, but they would have missed some, added some, something like that. But we are speaking of that scale, whatever they have put in on their website. It is there currently on the Government of India website. So they have, why did so many projects come up? One, of course, there's a Government of India Project Development Fund, which they kind of gave. But every state, when I say every, majority of the states probably had some kind of a project development fund. I myself was handling one of the Government of Karnataka's project development fund at one point of time. We're developing so many projects. No, so there was a support for the small scale projects to come to some level. But again, over a period of time, I mean, I exited India 6 years back and now in Australia, but the scale of the PDFs have kind of come down quite a lot. They're not picking up. They're not being used to do anything. The model has shifted from using a project development fund to what they call a project monitoring unit. They station the unit internally and then not exactly funding it, paying like an advisor rather than paying like a fund. So that transformation happened in the last 7 to 8 years in the country. So the nature of the fund is gone. But at the same time, I'm working with ADB on something on Southeast Asia as well as Central Asia. There, the project development fund seems to be picking up again as a concept. People are talking of creating a project development fund which can support innovative finances, essentially for innovative finance, but some are tuned towards climate finance, sustainable finance, etc. I think the theme has a merit still in the how it can be applied for small scale PPPs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we have been talking about some things, some related. Let me mention them, and then you take them up in whichever order you like to discuss them. But one is that Basel III requires commercial banks to reserve almost 100% for loans made to infrastructure projects, and how that is detrimental, and whether there could be a global movement that we can start to document the rate of default on these kinds of projects and maybe convince the banking regulators to allow for lower reserves for infrastructure. Since, of course, there are infrastructure projects that fail, but a lot of them, by the time the private sector investor has come in and put in money, they've pretty much, covered all the bases, and typically the government support and de-risking factors, etc. So there's that aspect of how do we change those rules. The other thing is, maybe other countries other than India and Brazil don't have local capital markets, but governments could set up funds to support small-scale PPPs, whether that type of support could be viability gap funding in certain cases, or just a grant in some other case, as you mentioned, Prakash, or other things. And the third topic is, we at WAP are thinking, and anybody that is here among our panelists or our audience that is interested or can help would be great. We're thinking about how to set up an international small-scale PPP fund, where it is based on exactly what Prakash was mentioning early on, the diversification as a way of mitigating risk, the venture capital way, even though probably returns will never be as high as Silicon Valley VCs, but still the decentralization is a good concept. So I throw these three topics at you to take them up in whichever way, order, or ideas, or build on them as you like. Maybe this time I will start with Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Ziad. Maybe I can speak a bit about the Project Development Fund as an enabler for small-scale PPP projects. And perhaps I can try and be skewed a bit to my county government, where I sit in the investment corporation. I think having a project development fund is very critical. First of all, to attract private sector to submit proposals to government, because it's through this fund that some of these players can get support to develop those project proposals. But the biggest problem has been that these funds are not developed, they're not improved. In fact, as we speak, when you look at most countries, there is no growth in these funds. So I think the biggest question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we create a mechanism that allows for these funds to grow? From my personal view, which is something I'm trying to suggest to my county, is that can we create a policy that allows part of the funds that come to the devolved units to be channeled towards this fund, so that continuously we're able to grow this fund to address the project development needs. So that's the basic that I can speak about the project development fund. Maybe we can give a chance to the rest of the panelists to share more about that.
Who would like to go? Doris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump on what Johnson had just said and make the link with Basel III regulation. I mean, which in my view is just there to prevent on purpose, to avoid having too many issues with the project. But as we say in France, I mean, breaking the thermometer does not break the fever, and the issue is not with the
Like that.
it is not with the amount. The issue is for me with the teams that are dedicated to those small projects and the global affordability for the governments. We have project development funds in France, and there are many in Europe. The issue that we've got is that they have many amounts available, but they've got a few people on board and not enough people to analyze properly the files. So consequently, what they do, they've got, they issue quite sort of standards. And as we said at the beginning of the call, I mean, small scale PPP cannot be standardized. So it ended by things I have seen in the call of the European Union some years ago, where 98% of the files were rejected because not compliant. And I have seen very beautiful projects in there, but they were not filling the form properly. And the way of working, just putting money on the table and having little team really overbooked compared to the deal flow does not work. It's not only a question of amount and fund, it's a question of having dedicated people, skilled people, able to adapt themselves to work. It seems that I am just expressing what a banker is and or what a banker was a long time ago. That was basically somebody, a financier dedicated to its sector, knowing sector and knowing what are the risks and what are not the risks. And today, I mean, this is too standardized, far much too standardized. And what we need more of in small scale PPP is not project fund, it's working capital funds, because those small projects have financial issues, not globally speaking, but they've got cash issues, temporarily cash issues, and they need support on the working capital side. And you do not find these tools on the market because Basel III says no to that. And this is where there is a missing link between the financial world and the real economy world.
Very interesting. It's very enlightening what you're saying, Doris. Working capital funds, and I mean, I think that perhaps with your role at UNECE and rest of us, maybe UNECE, I think, would be a great platform to open up the dialogue with Basel, being also geographically close on this topic. So hopefully we can have follow-up conversations on this. It would be really great.
We need to, because if I look 35 or 40 years ago when I started working, we were dealing with cook ratios, much easier, much simpler. And we had financed far more risky project than today. I mean, we could not today finance the project, and we could not even in Europe structure the project that we had been in the past. We could not today. Yeah. That would be impossible.
Indeed. Such a good point. Absolutely. I agree with you. The things I've worked on in my banking career, you wouldn't dream of doing today. I mean, yeah. And we were inventing, we were innovating, and this is my
we were doing what
yeah, exactly. This is my complaint, if you like, about PPP these days. we standardized it in a certain format, and people have come up with this education, and they're not willing to accept any other way of doing it. We were innovating all the time, and now it's like, no, this is how you do it. The World Bank comes and they give you the loan, and then that's it. And it's like, what? It can't be like that. We financed toll roads in Mexico with bond issues before there was no precedent for them, and yet the bond market bought them. We we tranched financings, included even, we were able to achieve AAA rating on some of the tranches. And, I mean, all kinds of things, even in third world countries. So yeah, definitely a call for innovation, even though Johnson doesn't like the word very much.
This is I've been trying to convey at UNEC, and with the works done with UNEC, is that when we talk standards, this is not standards, it's a backbone. Yeah, all PPPs have got a common backbone. Yeah, and if you do not go through that backbone, you will never make a PPP. That's right. But this is not going standard, full standard.
I love the way you think. We're going to have a lot of conversations.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I think I have, we'll go Rao and Prakash and then Johnson. That order.
Yeah, I was the kind of the origin of PDFs, the project development funds, and why the objective of those is always a constant debate with the governments. When we are running the fund in Government of Karnataka, the fund was given by the government. It's a budget item, which means it will come in unless there's a major change of heart from the government. You will have the budget item every year, whatever the amount may be. It'll keep coming in. So what are they looking for? Is a kind of a steady stream of projects, most of them small scale, coming up into the market. Unfortunately, some of the people, either in the finance system or in the private sector system, starts looking at whether we make it, what do you call, self-replenishing in one sense, or in a way of making the money for itself. Most of the governments actually don't ask, saying that, look, I don't want the money back, just give me projects. That's the kind of language they use when they set up a project. Give me some pipeline. There's no pipeline of small scale PPPs. Then we can think of replenishing the project. Money will come after that. But the way the thinking goes on to set up a project to ensure that the money is replenished and sustainable, you kind of lose the objective of getting the pipeline altogether. And that's what I've seen in many states across the country. Now, Cambodia, for instance, recently was toying with the idea of creating a project development fund for the public sector projects. They want to have a PPP projects PDF, but also have a public sector projects being developed, and then they want to put a certain amount of money, 2%, 1%, going into the budgets every year. And they're trying to create through their, whatever they call the public investment management strategy. And when we are looking at Central Asia, trying to create something, the governments, whenever they start with the pipeline. But somewhere the discussion goes off into replenishing, and then suddenly you see that the fund is not fully utilized. You have a competing fund coming up, and then end of there is no pipeline. That seems to be a kind of a recurring story all over the place, irrespective of geography.
Right. Prakash?
Yeah, I mean, I think my own experience is, I'm just going to stray away from the topic of project development fund. PPPs as a concept will actually multiply if we have examples on the ground. And there were two different approaches which were tried in India in the very nascent starting point. This I'm talking about mid-90s, when state governments and the development financial institution came together, and in some places there were user financing. We are just going to set up a special purpose vehicle, and the special purpose vehicle will actually develop the project. So all the three constituents, if there is a user community, yes, the government and the development financial institution came and set up the SPV for the project and put in development funds and said, okay, let us now develop the project. let us create all the structures that are required to make it financeable and also get some commitments on financing. And then let us go out to the market and bid out the project as a pure design, build, operate, assuming there is an operations involved. And there was a fixed return model in the sense that, okay, for all the people who are going to put in equity, the tariff which will come out will be based on a certain return on equity, or it could even be based on a return on project. Because you know all the costs, 95% of the costs will be based on a bid-out model, which also kind of put a tick box on transparency. So what happens is if the people who really want to get the project done come around the table, set up an SPV, and then say that for the equity guys, or the project itself will generate a certain return, and we bid out the fundamental part of the project as a DBO, then what you're doing is you're increasing competition for the DBO. You have somebody backing you up based on the structure for financing, and you will actually get very good competitive rates from the DBO, which will again bring down the whole cost of service to the end customer. So this is something which people can try to say that, okay, because I mean, all of us have worked with government bureaucracy, and there are people who are willing to take some risk. There are a lot of other people who don't want to take risk. This is actually very, very transparent. So there is no, lack of transparency in this structure. So some other countries can try this. The other alternative, which of course promoted by the World Bank, which is in the form of a Swiss challenge, I think that is also a great mechanism to bring in projects on the ground. Because you say that, okay, these are the kind of project ideas that we want implemented. We invite people with this qualification to come and give us a full project proposal, and they are responsible for delivering it. I only have to see whether financially there is competition for the proposal that you're submitting. And then, and some of the Indian states have actually got a policy. A few of them tried this, but I guess it is a lack of willingness to take it through. And Swiss Challenge, again, is a very good model for small-scale PPPs to bring projects on the ground. So I don't think we are lacking in ideas. I think we are lacking in courage to go forward. That is how I look at it.
Yeah, very good. Well, the Swiss Challenge, I know, is popular in India, but I don't know that it's even popular in Switzerland. So I think most other countries have had less than positive experiences with it, but somehow in India it has worked.
No. In India, the term is popular here, not the modality. The term is popular. Okay. It is discussed all over the place. We hardly have any projects on the ground which went through Swiss Challenge.
There are a few projects we went through, but of course,
it never
like I said, in the last 5 years, nobody has really kind of taken this forward.
Yeah, very good, Johnson, and then I'm going to go to the questions asked by the audience and comments.
Yeah, thanks, Ziad. I'll try and be as brief as possible. I think it's very important for us to offer a solution. I don't think the governments can achieve much, even if we increase the project development funds. They have not done much. If you look at the private participation in infrastructure report for last year, 2023, we had a paltry 300 projects across 137 economies in the world. And 67% of this came from the private sector. So I think it's very important for us to let the private sector innovate, come up with innovative solutions. And I think our emphasis should be, how do we create a framework that allows the private sector to recover whatever they invested in developing these solutions? And how do we build a transparent ecosystem that guarantees the private sector that when I bring an innovative solution that aligns with the needs of the government, that aligns with the strategy of the government, then it's going to win and we're going to recover investment. I think that should be the driving force so that we can see more of proposals coming from the private sector and government playing, that role of just making sure that there is a level playing field of allowing these projects to thrive. I think that is what we need to emphasize, because we can give money to governments. We know governments that were given funds to jumpstart these funds, but nothing much has happened 10 years later, and government to play their role in safeguarding this and the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a debatable subject, Johnson. Not sure not everybody agrees. I've heard arguments made at both ends, but typically, you know, either the governments know what they're doing and have planned some of their projects, or they're just sitting there waiting for somebody to come give them ideas. And there's been a lot of potential problems with unsolicited proposals. I'm not the right session to go through them, but I think, yes, it is one way, but I wouldn't say that this is what we would want to champion. I think this is one way that we can say is out there, and let people decide. As you can tell, I'm very careful about what we as WAP say, because we represent all kinds of participants in this field of ours, that's PPP. Very good. So there was one question that seems to have been answered. Enye Ogbebor asked Doris and Johnson, what are your thoughts on government accessing pension funds and life insurance for financing PPPs? I'm not sure that this was answered. Oh, yes, Doris answered it in writing. I see. Well, Doris, maybe not everybody's reading these things. You and Prakash, go ahead and say what you had to say about this.
I mean, pension fund, it's the money of people having worked all their lives. So you'd be pretty careful with that. I mean, we have seen in the past in some American crises pension fund could go, and that would be disaster for people. So I think it's a good idea that pension funds themselves invest in the society and namely in small scale PPP. They've got a month for that. Yet to the extent that, because I've seen that in some cases, government does not play a tricky game where they switch the responsibility of properly structuring the PPP to the pension funds, who do not have their skills. This is not their job. And also that the governance keeps the responsibility of repaying the debt at the end. Because if you do not repay pension funds, it makes a hole within pension funds, and who will pay the pension afterwards? So it's quite interesting, because pension funds are long-term actors with very expecting low returns on their financing. It's more the longevity and the continuity of the project, which is interesting for them. So it's good having them on board. Yet they always ask to be super senior to anyone, which is quite sometimes tricky to put in the documentations, namely vis-a-vis national banks or big players. So for me, that's the issue. It's finding the right balance to have them on board and not transferring to them any kind of risk just because they are big.
Would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, just wanted to add something to what Doris said, because see, we also have to understand what is the nature of capital and what are they willing to underwrite. And my experience in talking to pension funds is that they're happy to look at refinancing an operating project where it's just the operating risk. They want to see at least 2 years of operation. They want to know there are no operating risk on the project. There are no collection issues with the counterparty. There is good management. And like Doris said, they are not really seeking phenomenal returns. They want steady state returns. So it's virtually impossible to bring those people on board for development or construction. So as long as we keep that in mind, if you develop a good project, yeah, they are going to back you once the project becomes operational.
Indeed. Rao, you wanted to add something to this particular topic?
Yeah, so also one thing which kind of stopped, some of our discussions earlier with the pension funds, particularly the Canadian pension funds trying to enter India at one point of time, was the ticket size, of course, of a smaller projects. So there's what kind of investment they look at and then what kind of diligence they need to do. So the structure, what was thought about, always have a kind of a facility or a some element which is above, and then from there money goes down to small scale PPPs. It never took off. That idea was discussed, but essentially challenge again, it came down to the same issue. Ticket size is small, but also no one wants to take a construction and development risk. Everyone wants a stable running project and then trying to show that money is coming in when we do it, which is very difficult to show up in a bouquet of projects in a small scale size. Everything seems to be independent. We don't have a programmatic small scale projects. That was the problem.
Understood. Yeah. I'll take the comment of Sirio Lemertz. Sirio is from Brazil. He says, hello, everyone. It's very interesting, this topic, this time for Brazil. The state I live in suffers at this moment from huge climatic disaster, historical proportions in the country. In this special moment, I think the banks or funds leave the table, or they don't put money at risk and unknowing how huge is the risk before they can measure the impact. So there's an uncertainty about the risk, or the return rates of the projects are too high for government support. Maybe the philanthropic fund is a way out. If you can aboard this topic, I think is what he means. He would appreciate it. So, topic of philanthropic funds and developing small-scale PPPs.
Wow. I will answer to that one. In all my life, I've never found anyone giving me money for free, even for a very good project. So I know an academy in Uganda. I mean, the project is great. It's a kind of PPP structure. I've been fighting for the past 3 years to find even 1,000 euros to help them in their development. I mean, for me, philanthropic is not fitting together, except if you go sports or if you go culture. Sports works quite well with philanthropic, culture a little bit more, but for the rest, I mean, you're switching then a kind of faithful funds or diaspora funds, but it's not anymore pure philanthropic. And philanthropy needs, needs very special legal structure. So it's quite complicated to structure a PPP with a philanthropic support.
Johnson?
Yeah, just to add to what Doris has said, I think it's very important if we want to attract philanthropic funds to make sure that we understand the objective and mission of these philanthropic organizations so that we align our project to achieve some of the objectives that these funds want to achieve. As Doris has said, there's nothing for free. If we are able to show that we are able to support them to achieve the objective, then that is the only way that these funds can flow into this project. I think just as a word of advice to the audience or to the proponent of this question, I think we can look beyond philanthropic funds. I think if you look at blended structures that allow more players to participate in the project will be better, because it increases the chances of these projects attracting financing into the project. If you look at the climatic challenges that Brazil is facing, I think there's need for the originators, the governments, to structure this project in such a way that they're able to minimize some of these risks. So when you look at adaptation, mitigation, it's very important that they're entrenched in the design of these projects so that they can mitigate this risk. That is the only way these funds can flow into this project. It makes the projects expensive, but if you're looking at the long-term perspective, I think we're able to manage some of the risks that could cripple these projects.
Excellent comments. Thank you, Johnson. Rao?
Philanthropy worked to some extent in India in terms of looking at solid waste management a little bit, sanitation quite a lot, public toilets. That's where the philanthropists have actually put in money given to the government to construct and then operate the public toilets in some places. Started quite some time back, actually, in early 2000 something in Bangalore, moved on to Shimla in some places. Then Gates Foundation activities in India, quite a lot of PPPs came up as a fallout of that philanthropy, which has happened. So on the sanitation side, India did witness quite a few philanthropic efforts, but government has a program called CSR, which certain portion of the every company's profit has to be rooted into some things, some of which a fraction of that portion has actually gone into PPPs at some public places here and there, but not at a large scale, but the potential is quite high. There's also a problem in regulations, in at least in context of India. You can't take, I mean, because the Indian government believes that the portion which government is forcing the philanthropy, you take a corporate social responsibility, that element itself is such a substantial amount, it can cover many PPPs if really it is directed properly. So there's a restrictions on what kind of philanthropy is allowed, but yes, there are a lot of sanitation, public toilets, then solid waste management, education, for instance, in girl child, quite a few government public schools with the philanthropy helped have kind of engaged teachers and then trying to look at education model on the services side. So there are some examples. It's not a mainstream model, but definitely it has worked in some places.
Seems like there's always something to learn from India and Brazil. You guys are amazing. We have only 9 minutes left, and I'd like to have 2 minutes for wrapping up. So we have about 6 to 7 minutes left. There's a question from Kiran Mali. He says, how to enable local governments to understand the PPP structuring so as to enable more small-scale PPPs at local level. So how to bring up the awareness in local governments. Anybody would like to tackle that question?
I can tell you how we went wrong, and probably it might throw up some learnings. India ran a very large national PPP capacity building program. And
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the large PPP national capacity building program, which was run to train local governments on how to understand PPPs. And it's a complete ecosystem. Documents have been created, the money has been given, training has happened, and there's a hand-holding of various projects which went through. End of the day, it's is it the outcome commensurate with the effort? I still have my own doubts. Having that we have put so much effort, still we really cracked that area of ensuring the local governments went through. I suspect the challenge is always the motivation. If a person from a
Maybe
government
it should be...
does, sorry, what I'm saying is that the person who is in the government, there is no incentive if he completes a PPP project. So that the motivation is not there. It's just one more activity in his day-to-day job, and doesn't really matter whether he performs well or not. As long as that is not tackled, the small-scale PPPs will remain wherever we are. It's not the question of training. It's a question of ensuring that they have the incentive to complete.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to end on this gloomy, idea. I would think that many government officials are really motivated to get things done. But maybe very open training programs are not as valuable because people don't see the immediate applicability of what they're learning. But my advice would be to target the training to whenever there is an opportunity of a project or a program on that program, specifically in a specific area, rather than perhaps a general education system.
Sorry,
everybody.
I'm not suggesting that we should not do training. I'm just saying that it should be complemented with a better incentives.
Very good. Okay, excellent. So Rao is not that negative after all. He's positive. Doris, Prakash, then Johnson, and then we have to end, but very quickly.
Okay, I'll go fast. I would say make your project bankable and industriable. That means that make your project attractive for your local economy, your companies, the private sector. Let them earn their lives in comparison to the risk they are taking, and make the project bankable so that you are certain that you're going to repay bankers. A PPP is not more complicated than organizing a wedding, buying a car, or buying a house. It's exactly the same subject. You need to define the needs, and this is the responsibility of the government. Do your job. Know your people, know what they need today and tomorrow, know the evolutions underneath. Once you know that, you know how much it costs and you know how much you can repay. And this is the balance that you got to find in a PPP. There is nothing more complicated than that in a PPP. So, and I would say, if you need more advice, I call WAP and call UNEC. I mean, we are there for that. So come to us and we will answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Doris. Yeah, it's not that complicated. Johnson.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry, Prakash.
My...
Prakash. We said Prakash first, but you lowered your hand.
Sorry.
That's fine. I just want to say that if your government can actually afford it at the local level or at the central level, set up an incentive fund, which essentially says that I will give you from the government budget a certain amount of top-up money if you demonstrate delivery of PPP projects, not preparing documents and bidding it out. You demonstrate PPP projects, I'll give you the money. And that often works because many a times, and this should also work in many other countries, the provincial governments will look at this as an incentive and see whether we can do one up on the other one. And hopefully there'll be healthy competition. I think
we should add, Rupa, let's add that to the notes, make sure makes it into further discussion. I think it's a great idea. Incentive funds. Johnson.
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to change how we train government officials on PPPs. If there is a way to structure training around their own project, I think those trainings will yield more impact in terms of sharing knowledge and experience as to how to manage projects. So let's avoid more, the posh hotels. Let's use our projects. Can we learn how to manage, to structure and manage an entire cycle of a PPP project using our own project so that we know how best we can deliver that particular project. I think that will lead more results than just the theoretical trainings that we do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Doris Chevalier, Johnson Kilangi, Prakash Seshadri, Nathan Rao Ramaswamy. Thank you so much, guys. You have been amazingly enlightening. I'd love to have you back in these conversations in future sessions because this has been such a free-flowing and interesting conversation among true professionals. Thank you again, and thank you, the audience, for listening to us today. And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. There will be another one of our discussion sessions. I forget the date now, but literally 2 weeks, Friday, not next, the one after, at 2:30 p.m. Geneva time, all year long. Thank you very much.